You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host and bourbon-soaked storyteller, Juliette Miranda.
Hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda, and this is episode 135 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Studio, a lifestyle brand that makes premium headphones with studio-quality sound and that classic Scandinavian design. These headphones are the perfect combination of style and tech. Just go to studio.com, that's SUDIO.com, to check out all of their great headphones. They have on-ear and in-ear phones, and if you want 15% off your purchase, just use the code RANT during checkout. And now, y'all, I have two bourbon-soaked stories for you about an adoption shakedown and a wounded rebel. But first, let's have some bourbon. I'm pouring myself a glass of the Booker's Bourbon special release, Kathleen's Batch. Cheers, y'all. Now, before I tell you what I think of the Kathleen's Batch Booker's Bourbon, let me just give you a little bit of background about it. It is a special release, and it's a blend of 10 different barrels, which matured throughout different portions of the Jim Beam warehouse. And it has an average age of about 6 years, and it's bottled at cask strength, which is 127 proof. And now I'm going to say something that I don't often say. I hate this bourbon. I hate it so hard. It's just gripping me with distaste. Now, let me just be clear, all right? This is just my taste. And I'll be completely honest. The Kathleen's Batch is getting great reviews from people who know far more about bourbon than I ever could. So I don't know, maybe my palate is just tweaked, but to my taste, this bourbon, it is like sucking on a hunk of cedar that's been coated in Vicks VapoRub. It desperately needs water to even be remotely drinkable. And honestly, I'm not a fan of drenching my bourbon in a ton of ice because I like to taste my bourbon. Now, I know the argument could be made, well, it's just the proof that you don't like, but I love plenty of ultra-high proof bourbons, including classic Booker's. But this Kathleen's Batch, it's not my thing. And that's why I am going to switch over to my other glass, which is full of Old Granddad 114 instead. So, I'm wondering, y'all, did you know that it's possible to set a garbage disposal on fire? I just found this out the hard way. And I didn't even know it was possible because I tend to consider that anything involving plumbing is pretty much just fire resistant. But it turns out the electrical components can indeed short out and cause the plastic to flame up. I feel the need to establish that I was not drinking when this happened. I probably should have been, quite honestly, because drinking would have prevented me from adulting, which is what I was trying to do, and I swear I had the best of intentions. And that was my other problem, because seriously, aren't intentions just the worst? They are for me, anyway, because it seems like whenever I'm involved, good intentions just turn to crap. Like, back when I lived in Los Angeles, my occasional roommate, Loopy, she was full of good intentions. And it was her good intention to help me become a better person. She always used to argue that my attitude was the cause of all of my life's problems, whether that was my lack of a job or my inability to date decent guys. According to her, underneath all of my hate and snark and whatnot, there was just this sensitive and nurturing person waiting for the opportunity to shine. So every so often, she just got the urge to try and, coax it out of me. And for her, it was a little bit like an exorcism. Only instead of holy water, she'd douse me with enough bourbon to make me more receptive to her intentions. And every so often, one of her attacks would work, and I'd find myself volunteered to lead story time at the library or sorting donations for the local animal shelter. And I never minded these activities, but I can't say they did very much to make me a nicer person. I was still an asshole, just an occasionally helpful one. So, Loopy persisted. Unfortunately for both of us, for as good as her intentions were, her execution was never really all that well thought out. Which was the case when I discovered that she had adopted an Ethiopian child in my name. Not that she told me, of course. I only found out when little Edna from Ethiopia sent me a letter thanking me for my generosity and telling me about all of the good things that she would get with my $25 a month. She sent me a brochure and a calendar and a shitty tote bag, as kids in Ethiopia are known to do. And at first I thought it was some kind of mistake, because clearly I knew that I had not adopted that child, and how I was still on the fence about whether or not to adopt a kitten. So I showed the package to Loopy later that day, and she had a rare moment of clarity. "Oh yeah," she said, "I forgot about that." It would seem that when I was out one night, Loopy had a revelation. The only way to really thaw my frigid little heart was to give me something to care about. And she did consider a pet, she told me this, but then a commercial caught her eye. A commercial full of weeping, fly-ridden children just begging for her help. And that was when she knew what she had to do. To her, the moment was practically divine. Complete with a choir of angels and God himself dialing the telephone. But I knew better. The only godlike intervention she had came in the form of Vicodin. My best guess was that she'd mixed it with vodka and had mistaken her loopy haze for the rapture. So now I'm pissed. I walk to our refrigerator and I show my roommate its contents. There are 2 containers of expired yogurt, a brick of bulk cheese, and some sketchy-looking lettuce in there. We can barely feed ourselves, let alone Edna, who, I felt it necessary to point out, had suspiciously good grammar and a postmark for a P.O. box in Reseda. Loopy starts thumbing through the brochure and she says, "That doesn't mean anything. Look, she'll write you a letter every month." And that's when I say, I'm not paying $25 a month for a fucking pen pal. Loopy looks very hurt. "I was just trying to help," she says. And then I feel bad, and we both feel bad because I knew she meant well. But still, I'm not going to play faux mother to an Ethiopian child who may or may not exist. So I insisted she call and give Edna my regrets. And Loopy promised. She promised she would. That was the thing with Loopy. She always did have good intentions. And I'm sure she fully intended on calling whatever shady outfit she'd dialed to make this faux adoption deal. But right on cue, the next month, a letter arrived from little Edna, whose tone had changed considerably since her first letter. She wanted me to know how sad she was to not get her money, and how, because of me, she got kicked out of school for not having the proper school supplies. Please, wouldn't I just send her the $25? She even included a postage-paid envelope to make it easy for me. Damn that Loopy! Just a few days prior, she had abandoned my couch to crash with some guy that she knew in San Francisco, leaving me with a full rent bill to manage, a pile of empty vodka bottles to dispose of, and apparently an Ethiopian kid to feed and clothe. Well, I'll tell y'all, that letter went right out into the trash along with all of Loopy's bottles and empty pill packets. Edna was going to have to fend for herself. Then again, I forgot all about little Edna until the following month. This time she didn't write to me. She called me. Well, to be fair, it wasn't exactly Edna that called. It was her representative. And her rep had all of the makings of a goon, and essentially told me that if I didn't cough up the 3 back payments for Edna's well-being, not only would she be one step closer to death, but he'd see to it that I was that much closer to being put in jail. Yeah, right. They're not going to put me in jail for not feeding an Ethiopian kid. So I called the guy's bluff. But that's when he explains to me the terms of service, the program that my loving, well-intentioned, pain-in-the-ass roommate signed me up for. It turns out this was not a friendly Sally Struthers kind of place. These extortionists treated their symbolic adoptions like a subscription service, making them something of a Columbia music house of pretend starving kids. Since I hadn't returned the calendar or the stupid tote bag within 30 days, I was now obligated to pay for 12 months of their so-called service. And if I didn't, well, he said things would get very unpleasant. Unpleasant, I figured I could handle, so I said, Edna can suck it. I mean, really, what could she do to me? Well, it turns out she and her people could spend the next 3 months mercilessly harassing me. My alleged debt was sent to collections, and these terrorists were ruthless. You have to remember this was 20 years ago, so rules for collection agencies were pretty much non-existent. So I got calls all day and all night from these cock thugs. And these weren't friendly calls. They weren't, hey, Edna needs your help kind of calls. These were vicious, Edna's going to come to your home, steal your car, and murder your children kind of calls. And I knew things had gotten out of control when an ex-boyfriend whom I lived with a while back called me up out of the blue and said, "Who the hell is Edna and why is she sending you to jail?" Well, Edna was welcome to try and send me to jail. Hell, at least in jail I would know where I'd be sleeping every night, which is more than I can say for my unemployed condition back then. In the end, however, Edna never saw her threats through. The collection calls and threatening letters mysteriously just stopped one day. And I can only assume that Edna had been discovered by the feds as the fraud that she was. Still, she would pop back up in my life at inopportune times, like when I finally got a stable job and rented a new apartment, or when I attempted to buy a car. In fact, it was a good 10 years before I could fully shake that bitch, because that is how long it took me to fix my credit report. Anyway, I only bring Edna up because I was reminded of her as I tried to rid my kitchen of the fumes of molten plastic from the garbage disposal that I had tried, unsuccessfully, to fix. God damn my good intentions. Now, if y'all want to hear good things and hear those good things well, make sure you check out Studio headphones. These are the coolest headphones you could ever possibly want to wear. They look great, they fit great, and oh yeah, they sound great. Just go to studio.com, SUDIO.com, and check out everything they have available. And when you use the code RANT during checkout, you will get 15% off your order. Speaking of sounds, I saw that it was recently National Record Store Day. This is not an event I celebrate. You would think, with my lust for paper books and all that I would be all about the record albums. And I was once, but then one guy had to go and ruin it all for me. I'll call him LP. He was a real-life embodiment of the movie High Fidelity. In every way. I mean, just a waffling, moody kind of guy who really did work in a record store. And of course, that was how we met. The store was buried in what was, at the time, one of Chicago's dingier neighborhoods. There was a seedy tattoo parlor nearby, a punk bar around the corner, and there, off on one remote side street, was that record store. My girlfriend Texas and I found it one empty afternoon. She lived in the area and had convinced me to walk with her to a gas station to buy cigarettes. The record store caught my eye, and I pulled her in with me. And this record store was just a cliche. I mean, it's narrow and it's musty, and the walls are lined with posters for those deep dive kind of bands like Skinny Puppy and Bad Brains and The Replacements. And then there was LP, hunched behind the counter and wearing a CBGB's t-shirt. And like everything in that place, he had a used feel. Although in his case, it kind of worked. And that is to my downfall because I was always such a sucker for a wounded rebel. And Texas knew it. She saw it immediately. She gives me kind of a disgusted look and she just says, "Fine, just meet me at the bar when you're done." There weren't really very many people in the store. mostly guys in dusty hoodies who were engrossed in digging through the bins, so I had LP's full attention as I walked up to him. He had something of a hangdog face and an awkward smile, but as we bonded over our mutual love for Mike Nesmith's First National Band, I knew I was in trouble. There was just something about him that I dug. And I really should have listened to my friend Texas. I should have, because she hated LP. She hated him on sight and that whole pretentious record store. And I'd like to say that she was being unreasonable, but he didn't exactly endear himself to her. Early on in our dating, I took him to a party at her house, and he got blazingly drunk. And not in a quiet, pass-out-in-the-corner kind of way, but more in a ceaseless, aggressive sort of way. And he was so out of control that he was actually grabbing cupcakes from a tray and smashing them on people's heads. That he could not hold his booze should have immediately prompted me to ditch the guy. But that is the trouble with a wounded rebel, for me anyway, because it's far too easy to excuse bad behavior on the grounds of past trauma. And oh, did he have a rough life. Just ask him. Now, there was the death of his father, which, believe me, I understand is a tragedy. But it had happened 10 years prior, and it set LP up with a sizable inheritance that allowed him to wallow away his days at that record store, which, by the way, he did not own. And then there was his ex. Whether she was the one who broke his heart or the one he let get away changed on a daily basis. But she was a constant presence in our relationship. Everything came with a comparison to her. Sometimes it was the way that I wore my hair, because he liked the way she tucked hers behind her ears. Sometimes he'd criticize the music that I liked because, she was a Wilco fan and I wasn't. Or it would come with a whimsical remark about how he missed the smell of her tequila and that my bourbon just smelled stale. Ugh. And she wasn't just a phantom. Oh, no, she would call every so often, either to scream at him for existing, or beg him for help when her basement flooded, or ask for a lift when her car broke down. And he did all of these things for her without fail. Yet when I needed someone to look in on my cat one weekend, he couldn't be bothered. I would tell these things to my girlfriend Texas, and she would tell me to dump the guy. Dump the guy and run. She wanted me out of the relationship so badly that she actually tried to bribe me with unlimited trips to the strip club and access to her attractive neighbor. But I didn't bite. I didn't even really think about it because I just liked the guy, despite all of those obnoxious tendencies. We got along, he understood me, and we just had fun together. So it wasn't that he was a bad person. I just couldn't see that he wasn't an especially good boyfriend. So we stayed together for more than a year. In that time, we started living together without actually living together, which pretty much meant that he wanted me to sleep at his place every night, but didn't want me to move in any of my stuff. And I went along with it. I did, because I thought that there would be more for us in the future. I didn't have a clear idea of what that would be or when it would happen, but I genuinely believed he would come around. And he seemed to be. He met my family. He let me move my curling iron in. And there was progress. Until his ex got cancer. LP broke the news to me over dinner one night. Certainly explained why I'd seen her skulking around the record store so much lately. And every time I'd bump into her, she'd completely avoid meeting my eyes and would try to dart out a side door. And although LP always assured me that there was nothing going on, I'd had my doubts. Of course, I hadn't expected him to announce that she had cancer, and my first reaction was relief that he wasn't sleeping with her. And that was quickly followed by a more typically black-hearted response when I said, "So why is this your problem?" LP broke out a tiny little violin and explained to me how she came to him for support, how she needed his help getting to and from the hospital during the week. Couldn't I just understand? Well, fuck. There's no arguing with that kind of setup. I'm not a monster, just an asshole. For an entire month, I sat back while LP tended to his ex. I accepted the lonely nights while he kept her company at her house. I conceded to him missing parties and plans because he had to drive her to the hospital or run her errands. And we really didn't talk much during this time. LP would occasionally call me or email me, and it was usually late at night and only for a few minutes to update me on how she was doing. And one time he even suggested that I make her a mixtape to cheer her up. I did not do that. I didn't really do much of anything except feel my dumb heart break in half. It was another 2 weeks before I actually saw LP. He showed up on my doorstep one night with a bag containing the very few things he deigned I could keep at his place. More than a year of dating and our entire relationship could barely fill a paper bag. There really wasn't much for LP to say, other than he and his ex were going to give things another shot. I wanted to hate the guy, but how could I? His new girlfriend had cancer. It is the one statement that trumps everything. And I made this very same statement to Texas the next night. She was propping my sorry self up on a bottle of Jack Daniels, listening to me whine and offering that bare minimum of consolation because she really did hate that guy. I whined for another hour or so, and by that time Texas had had her fill. She was tired of listening to me, and she looks at me and she grabs my hand and she says, "His ex does not have cancer." Well, that stops me cold, and I say, "What?" And she says, "Sweetheart, that bitch is faking cancer." Texas pours me another drink, and she explains. You see, Texas worked at the hospital where LP was dropping his ex off every week for her alleged treatment. She happened to be at the main entrance one day when LP drove up, and she watched as his ex hopped out of the car, waved while LP drove away, and then that girl skipped across the street to a coffee shop. I don't even know what to say to this. I'm completely dumbfounded. I can feel my blood running cold, and I don't know if I want to scream or cry about the whole thing. And part of me wanted to rationalize it, to suggest that maybe there was even an explanation for it all, or even to possibly suggest that Texas was just making this up because she never did like the guy. But my loving girlfriend stops me and she says, "Go see for yourself." I don't know why I cared. It is a curse that we all just seem to feel it necessary to seek closure when a relationship, even a shitty one, ends. But God help me, that's what I wanted. I needed to see this for myself, so that following Tuesday, I put on a little cloak and dagger routine, tied up my hair, put on a baseball cap, and then I set up a pathetic surveillance in front of the hospital. Just as Texas had said, LP pulled up at 11:45 in the morning. His ex steps out of the car and gives him a quick kiss. And I have to say, with just a little bit of smug satisfaction, that she was wearing her hair in a style very similar to mine, which was clearly a move done to appease LP's fondness for relationship callbacks. She watches as he drives away, and then right on cue, I see her casually walk across the street to the coffee shop. Y'all, I hate to admit this, because it is not a moment that I am proud of. It's just one of those crazy things that you do sometimes when you see something that just defies all logic. But I followed her. I followed her right into that coffee shop and watched as she set up camp at a corner table with a drink and a stack of fashion magazines. And it hit me. That crazy bitch lied about having cancer. Who does that? Now, I know y'all are likely expecting me now to say how I marched right up to that crazy broad and exposed her sick little game. Or maybe you're thinking that I called LP and told him where to find his girl, because it certainly wasn't in a hospital. But I didn't. I think some moments are just too potent for action, because I stood in that doorway for another minute, and then I turned around and drove home. And I'll tell you, to this day, I don't know if I did the right thing. I mean, what would you have done? I couldn't tell you what happened to LP or his ex, but here's what I do know. Eventually, the entire block where LP's record store was located was bought by a development company. They knocked down a bunch of buildings and renovated the whole street, and that record store is long gone. In its place is an Urban Outfitters that also just happens to sell record albums. I don't know if I'd call that even exactly, but it does make me feel just the slightest bit better about everything. Well, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Unwritable Rant podcast, y'all. If you want to catch up on back episodes, just go to theunwritablerant.com. And you'll find a link to our merch store there where we have flasks and t-shirts and all kinds of good stuff. As for me, right now I'm going to go hunt down some more bourbon, and I'll be back to chat with y'all again next Sunday. Cheers, y'all.
Go to theunwritablerant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter at Morning Neurosis.
Girl, you was pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, a couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away. Let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton, hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo. Sweetest taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this.